All right, guys. So welcome. Good to see you both so much. Again, if you're just joining and you're checking out the video, we welcome you. The idea today is to have a sit down and just kind of a fireside chat or a round table interview here discussing my two latest books. I am Luis Herrera. I am the author of Teddy Newman's Heaven and also of Singularity, 12 Precepts for Transcendental Living, which just came out a couple of months ago. Teddy Newman was published in September of 2021. The reason I have the panelists here, David and Topher, they both actually contributed to the Teddy Newman in huge ways. David produced the audiobook. It was the third novel that he produced for me for Audible and iTunes, basically just the official audiobook version. Did an amazing job. He also contributed a type of afterword, it's like a commentary on the audiobook version that was not printed. And Topher Reynoso is my brother-in-law, all around awesome guy, very smart. He did study philosophy, and we have kind of these deep philosophical chats when we get a chance. I asked him to do the afterword, which he did a phenomenal job on, and also much commentary on the afterword for that book. People really enjoy it. So welcome both of you. So glad to have you with me today for this.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so the idea with today was just to have kind of a casual conversation, something that we could share right to our respective people, just to have a public link so people can check out, learn a little bit about the books, learn a little bit about my writing, I guess you would say, and see if it's something that they want to look into further. They can check out the audiobook, get a print copy, ebook. I make all available versions for the ease of reading. So the format is pretty simple. We had each prepared 2 questions that we're going to ask the other 2 for a total of 12 questions in the interview. And there's no particular order. I don't know if somebody wants to volunteer to go first to ask a question. And the idea is to have fun, right? This isn't an exam. It's not a quiz. We're here just to have a kind of a fireside chat style conversation about the content of the books. So I don't know if I have a volunteer.
Sure, I'll go first.
All right, thank you, David.
Luis, a question for you.
Yeah.
I got to read it.
No worries.
In Teddy Newman's Heaven, there's an inference that Teddy, while in heaven, provides some inspiration to his son's writing. His son is a writer on Earth. By some method. It's not clearly explained how it happens. But have you experienced anything like that in your own writing? So you felt some sort of an influence from a relative that your deceased relative, I should say.
So thank you for the question. It's there's a kind of a recurring theme. I don't know if you remember way back in Lucas Black, 2017 is the first book you produced for me. I remember when you auditioned for that, by the way, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe someone of this caliber auditioned for my book. I felt really validated. And of course, the rest is history. There's some reference in that book also about dreams. I think that I do feel that the primary ingredient, so to speak, in being a writer is to have inspiration. You got to have something to say. That's all I tell people. Forget about the technical aspects of putting it together, creating chapters. That's actually something that I developed over the long term, over much trial and error. But the primary thing for being a writer is to have something to say. I do feel that my dreams inspire me quite a bit. I feel like I'm in touch with kind of that ethereal side of life. I don't know if you can call it spirituality, you can call it the psyche, but I do feel that when I have dreams, if they're recurring, try to kind of listen in. Okay, what is my soul trying to tell me here? But to answer your question, do I feel like I'm being transmitted messages like our protagonist was in Teddy Newman, that Dominic Newman received messages from his father, Teddy, I do not feel that I've been contacted that way or been inspired by another spirit. If I have been, it's more of a universal spirit, right? But not necessarily someone that's particularly passed away. Actually, the closest person that's to me that has passed away is my maternal grandmother, Enid. She died in 2015, which is, I came to Costa Rica from California right on the heels of that. And I do dream about her sometimes. She shows up pretty regularly in my dreams, but I do not feel that there's been a book that's come about because of any kind of message that's been transmitted that way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the question. Interesting question.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to sort of touch on that a little bit more.
Yes, absolutely.
I think, David, the question made me think, and I don't know why this one jumped out in particular, because there's lots of instances of inspiration, but maybe think of Handel's The Messiah. So Handel actually said, when asked about making this, like, it wasn't me, like, honestly, something just inspired and took over, and all of a sudden this came out. And it's funny because I had a philosophy professor who was talking about that, and he was like, I think he was trying to do it, he being Handel, I think he was saying that he was inspired because he thought it would sound more humble. But then my professor was like, actually, I think it makes him more arrogant. Like, somehow he's got a direct connection to God. How come he gets that? That's not cool.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Why can't I do that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And I think it's an interesting question about, like, the source of inspiration, and is there like a way to bridge that gap between the afterlife and our present life? And even if we can't think of a physical or literal way of doing that, is there some type of connection between the hereafter and here? And I don't have an answer, obviously.
Right.
I don't know any of us do.
Yeah, no,
But I do love the idea that, like, Luis, you can receive inspiration from God, that each of us are individually connected in one way or another to a creator, whatever it is, or however you believe in that. Your existence is dependent upon it if you believe in a higher entity. And so to me, the idea that we would just be dumped here alone and there's no connection between us and that hereafter or the greater essence it seems nonsensical to me, even though if you ask someone who doesn't believe in God, believing in that is what's actually nonsensical. And so I love this question because it makes me think about, man, where does any inspiration come from? Like, how much of it is it actually just me? How much is it God or, a relative inspiring inside of us? I think it raises some interesting sort of metaphysical questions for me of how much is actually on our own and how much is inspired by something or someone else.
Right. Matter of just letting the muse take over.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Right.
Luis, you're the writer here. I'd love as well, like, any sort of muse takeover at all that you feel when you're doing some of this? Because I like talking to some different writers and hearing about how, like, they approach and what their writing process is. And I know it may not always be the same every time that you write, just from some of the writers I've talked to, but I'd love to hear, like, do you ascribe any sort of enlightenment or inspiration or a muse that really guides you on that path?
Yeah, thank you, Topher. Again, interesting conversation and very deep questions. I think that, honestly speaking, I do feel, especially during Teddy Newman, that when I would sit down, and by the way, this is a trick, or maybe not a trick, but methodology on my behalf. I never do more than one chapter in a day. If I'm super inspired, I'll knock out 1.5, not 2 entirely. The reason for that is I feel that each chapter has its own flavor, its own kind of message that is trying to get across. I mentioned this actually in Singularity, and if it's not a verbatim quote, it's close to it, that I say I feel that the words flow through me more than they come from me. That is actually a quote from Singularity. when I'm talking about how people should do, how we're wired to create, and we have different things that we're here to create and to do. I don't want to say that, that I have a muse, but I can't deny that I do either. I do feel like I will ruminate a message, something that I want to say, something that's kind of bubbling up within me. And I think it's important to kind of sit on it a while, let it simmer, sleep on it, if you will. And if you 2, 3, 4 days, a week goes by, you get to Saturday, you still have that message, it's in your heart. When I sit down on paper, there's something transformative that happens, that it's almost like alchemy, where I just start writing. And there's a lot of talk these days about this flow state, about, being in flow, and about how you could be flowing on a skateboard, you could flow on a ski slope, you can, as an artist, as a programmer or coder. I do feel like I tap into that state. I'll maybe put on some music, and the chapter almost writes itself. When the chapter is done, I will have to stop and go back and read through and then do some editing. There's usually not much to edit. Normally what I do is some line editing, where like, okay, I use this word twice, kind of too close to in a row. I could say this a little better. I could clean this up a bit. But it is inspiration. And that's why I say any advice that I have to writers, you got to have something to say. That is the almost the only requisite for being a writer. Beyond that, the editing, the paragraph construction, the chapter editing, all of that can be processed after the fact. I don't know if that answers your question in any way.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think it's interesting that you describe it sort of on a episodic, for you, it's a chapter a day or something like that, at most, I think you said.
Right.
And I think that's interesting, where it's like, I think if you talk to most artists, there's some amount of exhaustion that they'll describe in creating a work. And it doesn't matter how big or small that work is, if you're working on it as a creative in a creative way, it's exhausting. And so I can imagine, it might get really tiring. And so I think it's smart actually to base yourself a bit on that chapter a day type of mentality. And obviously, like you said, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's not like the inspiration's really flowing. You're gonna, that's a chapter, I'm shutting it down right now.
Right.
But I think that's smart how you tap into that. That's interesting.
And
I
if
can imagine that.
Sorry,
Go
go ahead, David.
Well, I can imagine that given the method that you're describing there would work pretty well for a story like Teddy Newman's Heaven, where there are quite striking differences between chapters and the themes of them. Some of them are very light and uplifting, others are very dark and ominous. And others in between. So it's overall, the book is uplifting, no question about it. And that's one of the things that attracted me to the story. And as I got into it, attracted me to narrate the story, I should say. And as I got into it, I found other things that said, oh, I'm very glad I did this, put it that way. Yeah.
Thank you, David. I think we're all glad you did it. Because yeah, I mean, the reviews, it's been the most popular book. It's boasting not to, to pour salt on it, but it's all 5-star reviews right now. And for print and the audio version. And just it makes me so happy to get a review and to hear someone's connection with it. We've had people say, hey, I'm basically atheist, but I really connected to it. I like what it had to say. I've had comments and read comments that say it reminded me of being in philosophy school or class. And, I appreciate it. And it's true. Yeah, there are some dark chapters and some light and some funny. And if I could clarify, it's not so much a chapter a day. It's more like a chapter a week, at least with my methodology. Is
A chapter at a time.
Yes, I'll have a week, 10 days, where this kind of message is processing, and I'm slowly processing as I go about my day to day, in the shower, driving to work, after the day is over, when I'm in bed, reading a little bit. I'll kind of pause what I'm reading. I'll think, oh, this could help me, or this is kind of feeding the the story as it's happening right now. So yeah, very interesting process. I do think that it is somewhat divinely inspired. Again, that is not to say that anybody could not write. I think anybody can. Whether you have the discipline to sit down and pound out a couple of pages, a chapter, a book, that's another story, right? There's a lot of inspired people that may just not have the discipline to actually sit down and do the grunt work, if you will, of actually producing a book. So that's another element I would say as well.
Mhm.
Excellent. But giving us a lot to talk about. David, you have another question there?
Yeah, for Topher. Let's go that way from my notes here. Has the depiction of, we're staying on Teddy Newman's Heaven for now. The depiction of heaven in Teddy Newman's Heaven, has that changed your view of it, augmented it in any way, influenced it, caused it to look at it in a different light, or is this something you always had in your mind? And of course, in the story, the idea, the concept is brought out that everyone's view of heaven is different while you're there. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what it brought to you.
I think that idea of sort of heaven being personalized, the first time I think I actually saw that, I was probably in my teens. There's this movie called What Dreams May Come, and it's got the late
Robin
Williams in it.
Yeah.
And Cuba Gooding Jr. is in it as well. And when Robin Williams arrives, he says he sees Robin Williams' heaven, and he's all surprised by it and realizes there's paint in it, the landscapes have been painted.
Mm-hmm.
And so Cuba Gooding Jr. is walking him through. He's like, man, I've seen a lot of people's heavens. Yours is the first one I've ever seen that painted landscapes with actual paint. So this idea of individualizing it, that was the first time I'd ever heard of it. But what I liked about Teddy Newman is we sort of delved deeper into, well, what would that look like for other people? What's going to make someone happy? Some people want to be in New Jerusalem and live downtown and be surrounded by all these people. And seeing that, or trying to envision in my head how all of those people can coexist in one heaven. If heaven's so different for you than it is for your neighbor, how could you all be in heaven together? And that's where I actually think Teddy Newman helped me realize, well, that's just my mortal mind thinking in temporal space and how this is all supposed to work together. But sort of what Teddy Newman helped me do was sort of remove myself from that. Well, obviously it's difficult because we're still living in temporal space and time. This is who we are. So it's like a window into what I think something like this could look like. And that's what was unique for me, is I had never quite bridged that gap, made the jump of, okay, but if it's my heaven, am I alone in that heaven? And there's just a bunch of robots operating, making me think that I'm with other people. But no, I think there's definitely a way that can be bridged once you sort of remove from that very mortal, temporal type of thinking for space and time.
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
possibly conceiving it as it's all I want to say holographic, but that it's generated for you.
Yeah. Some type of generated experience that can be sort of held through a pair of glasses that lets you see it the way that you need
the way you prefer to see it.
Exactly. And the person next to you probably
Right.
looking at the same thing with a different set of glasses on, and they're having a different experience, but in the same type of way. But I'd love to hear, that's how I took it, but it's also how I take it may not be the way that the author intends it to be interpreted. So I'm always interested as well. When I was writing the afterword, it was funny because I had a few conversations with Luis, and I remember you and I, Luis, going back and forth a little bit where it was like, how did you get that out of it? Oh, no way. How did you get that out? It was like, there's no wrong answer, but
Yeah,
obviously there's what the author thought going into it. And this is one of the beautiful things about being a creative like this, Luis, is that you're able to actually, with your story, make people see, feel, think things that you never thought, saw, felt when you wrote it. And so having that in mind, I'd love to hear if there is anything in my interpretation of what I added there that was surprising, or that you're like, no, that's dead on.
No, I love to hear it because, again, as a writer, as a creator, at least the way that I go about my books is that I do want to create a mirror. Right now, a mirror is only going to reflect what the beholder sees, right? It's not what the creator of the mirror intends, it's what the beholder sees. So yeah, in a way, and maybe I'm giving away a secret here, but I think you'll find that in my descriptions, like I'm not huge on Tolkien style, 3 pages of describing the doorway and the rocks leading up to, and the sounds in the chamber. Like I leave a lot to, and maybe this is something inspired me when I was a kid. I used to love California. I was, 10, 11 years old. Choose your own adventure stories. And, anytime we go to a garage sale, I would look through the cardboard box full of books. Is there a choose your own adventure? And these are stories where, there's a surfer and he got attacked by a shark. Okay. If you swim to the beach, turn to page 68. If you decide to flag down the lifeguard, turn to page 32. And something about that stayed with me. And I do like, since that, I think my writing, I like to place you in the picture. I like to think of myself as a director, kind of building a stage and a set around you where you can integrate yourself as an avatar of sorts. And like, wow. And so when I hear Topher say about how this kind of maybe opened up his mind a little bit to think, okay, this isn't the hard and fast physical world on earth that we're used to. There's going to be some rules that are broken, some elements that I hadn't thought about, where we can all co-inhabit heaven and somehow have our own personal heaven. I love hearing that. For me as an author, that's what I live for, is that type of analysis and feedback, to be honest with you. So yeah, I think you're dead on that.
There is a possibility that, given that our ability to conceive what the afterlife is, being that it is so limited, as you mentioned in Singularity, comparing, expecting an ant to understand who God is and what God is, or the creator. You couldn't expect an ant to do that. We couldn't be expected to understand what the afterlife is. So it could be something that is an experience that we could just never have comprehended before. Period. I mean, in the story in Teddy Newman's Heaven, there is a lot of familiarity to it, meaning that you're in a restaurant, or you are at a concert or something like that, and we understand those situations, or it's a downtown area in a store. It is good to have those familiar things, but perhaps what it is something that we just would never have been able to comprehend previously.
Yes, that's an excellent point.
And then it becomes a universal thing, but your version of it is also it's also viable. It's also worth considering. That it could be made just for you.
Yeah. So, and I didn't write it with any type of pretension of, hey, this is, I got to figure it out. This is the answer, right?
This is the way it is. Right.
Right. Yeah. I don't pretend to have the authority of like say, a preacher that is, wrote a book about heaven. I read one like that as I was writing Teddy Newman. And this particular person tried to be very authoritative. Hey, based on the scriptures, this is what's going to happen. Now, the funny thing is, it was a relatively thick book, but it was completely devoid of details. So it was, kind of nebulous. It's this idea that, we're all kind of on this happy, cloud, so to speak, and everything's perfect, and there's rainbows everywhere and stuff like that. So what I set about to deal with Teddy Newman was to kind of shatter that stereotype a little bit, that it's just going to be, actually, I make a very direct reference to it, I think in the very last chapter, about some people say we're just, strumming away at harps with our halos on, and like, that's not it. So I took a risk. I think you have to be somewhat risky in your writing if you're going to say something new or something unique, where you're saying, hey, that's not exactly right. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but what if this were a possibility, right? And so that's kind of the way that I wrote the story, is, again, positing a different version of that reality, what it could be. Someday we'll all find out in person, right? Either in a few days or a few decades, everybody on this call will know what happens on the other side of that veil. But in the meantime, it's fun to wonder, it's fun to have that curious mind, and to be open-minded to discuss it, because I think when you get in trouble is when you become very rigid and you say, no, I know what's going to happen. And I think that's a cause for a lot of division and heartache, which is kind of more along the lines of what Singularity talks about.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you mention it that way, because it's like, as I hear you describe that book, which, I've read Dante's Inferno and Paradiso, and I've read, some of the works similar to that. C.S. Lewis has one that describes, heaven and a few different things in that realm. But it's like, when I think about you reading sort of I don't know if it was a pastor or some clerical clergy member that
along those lines.
Yeah. It's funny because I'll bet if you asked that person about your book, yours would be characterized as fiction. But the hilarious thing to me is that if you don't recognize that theirs is fiction as well, like, you missed something, my friend. Like, this is all conjecture. Like, sure, we could have some scriptures, but like, how do you interpret that? How do you make that personal? How do you draw, the perfect picture of what, like we've been talking about, something outside of the mortal temporal experience? How could you possibly describe that in words? Any attempt at it is going to be some amount of fiction. And so you kind of have to accept that and then move on and sort of move through and personalize it and draw out that message that you're trying to get across to folks. And so that's one of the things I liked, was that I didn't feel like it was, hey, this is hard and fast. This is how it is. This is how it's going to be. This is how it will be for everyone. And instead I walked away with, okay, let's recognize this and have some fun with it. Let's imagine what Teddy Newman's heaven is going to be like. And it made it very personal and made me think, what's my heaven going to be like?
Love that. Topher, you got, why don't we hand the microphone, David, it's okay with you, to Topher? Maybe he's got a couple of questions here.
For Topher?
Or no, if Topher could ask some questions.
Yes, please.
Yeah, happy to. So the first one that I want to ask, I'll shoot this one to you, David. Aside from, deity represented in Teddy Newman's heaven, because I feel like, Yeshua or Jesus is too easy of a character to grab out of this. So I'm going to set that one aside. Aside from deity represented, is there a character that embodies a precept from transcendental living that you find particularly inspiring or cautionary? Because we also have some characters in there who have some cautionary tales, right? So
yeah,
what resonated with you and why?
The character that resonated with me the most was Teddy's father. I'm having I'm having trouble with his name. What's Teddy's father's name?
Hold on. I got it.
All right, okay.
I'll fix this for us. I want to say it was
Howard,
Howard.
which you
Howard.
nailed, by the way, David.
Yes.
You nailed
Howard.
that.
How can
You
I?
had
How can
people
I not?
rolling.
I
Howard
had so much. I had so much fun with that character. Because, well, it was obviously it's your writing, Luis, that sparked it in me, and I wanted to portray him as a comical, but not a farce, if you know what I mean. At the same time,
Sure, it's not a spoof. It's
not a
comical,
spoof,
but
not a spoof so much. While I was doing it, and I think I mentioned this person, but I don't think you remembered him or knew of him. Jackie Mason.
Yes, I looked them
Comedian
up after
Jackie
the.
Mason. Yeah,
It's very close.
and it
Yeah.
just jumped out at me, what you had, what you had written for the character, and what I conceived him to be, and but you know that the character was, to me, was very interesting and inspiring. The Precept from Singularity that I equate with him, was that, I'm going to paraphrase, everything happens for a reason. You know, go with the flow. Only salmon swim upstream, and that's what he seemed to be in the story. Teddy Newman's Heaven. Nobody just lies around and does nothing, or at least most people don't lie around and do nothing. They
or at
have
least not
some,
forever.
not forever, for a while, until they're ready. But they have something that drives them. And in Howard's case, was running a restaurant. It's something that I would never do. And I don't understand how people actually take that on. So I'm going to
Right.
get into this thing where it's going to be impossible to serve everyone at once. Very few people are going to be happy, and it just seems like a quite an undertaking. But
I'm annoyed
that was
for
his
them
thing.
when they're serving me.
What's that? I'm
I
sorry.
said I'm annoyed for them when they're serving me.
Yeah, right. It's
I wouldn't want to serve
it's
me.
empathy, right? So that's why, you know, try to be
That's
as
funny.
nice as you can with them. But given that, and I don't remember in the story what Howard was like while he was on Earth, if he was the same way. But in heaven, he's, you know, he's doing this. He puts on, he gets a concert together at one of his restaurants, or I don't know if it might be his only restaurant, but he's doing that. He's working at it, and it seems like he just said, I'm going to serve some wonderful food, give some wonderful entertainment, and I'll just do my very best, and people are going to love it. So going with the flow.
Yep. Yeah.
But it's
love that.
but at the same time, it's going with the flow and not having inspiration. You know, that's kind of, that's a fine line sometimes. And I'm going to go with the flow. Going with the flow sounds like, let me just sit back and take it easy and see what happens.
It's funny because I think
there's a mixture there.
For like the type A personality who wants to be in control, wants to be doing all these things, it's actually far more work to be like, all right, I'm going to lay back and let this happen.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
you are
you can't sit
inwardly
still.
just fighting yourself the whole time
Mhm.
to try to make that happen. That's cool. It's a cool character. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add there, Luis, but I've got a couple comments.
Well, I just, to Luis, I wanted to thank you for giving me the latitude with that character. because I don't know if you envisioned him like that, but I thought it fit so well
You
to
put
have
a
him be
comical spin that
like a
I had.
stand-up, almost like a stand-up comedian
Yeah,
in the way he now I don't want to give away too much, but it's I had a lot of fun with it. I'll put it that way.
I think Howard was a highlight. You did definitely spice it up. You put the Bosco spice on that guy, because I did not write him as he sounds
Mhm.
in my mind. But you made it work, and you did not change. You're very faithful with, the wording and the verbiage, and you don't improvise and like rewrite, the book as you produce it.
Mhm.
But you do add your flavor, your spice, your acting, and I think you hit it out of the park with Howard. I do hear comments that he's a highlight for a lot of people. So thank you for, again, and that's why I keep coming back to Mr. Bosco here when I have a gem. There's a few books that you not produced, but I think the ones that you needed to, you have so far. So I'm happy
Mhm.
about that. Topher, sorry, you said you had a couple of comments. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about Howard, and his path, his journey to heaven being so different than Teddy's experience. And what actually struck me is Howard, I think, exercises more faith than anybody that sort of moved through that process. And what I mean by that is, faced with the eternities in front of him, he has enough humility to recognize what he didn't know and what he wasn't sure of, and actually what wasn't right from his understanding. And to still be able to move on from that and trust that, okay, maybe I went my whole life like this and it didn't work out exactly the way that I thought, but here's what I'm drawing from that, how I'm moving on to the next phase. And it made me think a little bit about, okay, so, in this book, we put someone of a Jewish faith having to run up against accepting the Savior, right? Yeshua is what we have in this particular case.
Right.
What was interesting in the book is that made me think, how would I handle being in that situation? What if it turns out I'm the one who's totally off? What happens when I get to that side and realize I'm in that position and I need to make the change? Will I be humble enough to recognize that and move? Because otherwise, we're exactly describing those masses, as they referred to in the book, who couldn't accept Yeshua and enter into heaven. So it just made me think a lot about like that tenet of the path of humility travels the highest roads, and how important humility is, where it's like, yes, I'm trusting in God. Yes, I'm trying as hard as I can. Yes, I have faith in this. But am I humble enough when faced with my Creator to realize the things I got wrong, or the things that I'm holding on to dearly that maybe aren't actually true? And I think that's a really tough thing to think of as a human, where it's like, no, I'm right. I'm totally, and like, I'm educated. I've read about this a lot. I've even prayed, like, I am right. This is nuts. How could I be wrong? But like, we're describing a lot of people in this book who are in that exact situation. And this character is inspiring to me because they figured a way through it. And it just makes me go, oh my gosh, would I figure out a way through it?
That's an awesome reflection, Topher. Thank you for bringing that to light. And again, this is precisely why I wanted both of you on this call. I really couldn't think of better people for this. Excellent points. And yeah, I think, like you're talking about, you referred to the 11th precept, the path of humility travels the highest roads. That's pretty much the closing of the book, right? There is only one before that, which is after that, I should say, which is basically reinforcing the first, which is about singularity itself. But yeah, I think, that the humble person gets through. And I think not only in the afterlife, not only when we're facing our Creator, but in this life, as we're working through being parents and fathers and coworkers and sons and cousins or whatever it is. That I think that the humble person shows not only professionalism, but also is in a better place to understand, to adapt, and to make it to that next level in every conceivable way. Very good point. Topher, did you want to ask another question?
Yeah,
we got
I'm
a good pace
gonna
here.
send one your way here, Luis.
Okay.
All right, so it's sort of related, but on the path to a fulfilled life and peaceful afterlife, and sort of setting aside what it is each of us may believe or listeners may believe about what the afterlife is, if nothing else, being laid to rest, knowing that you have a clear conscience and that
Sure.
you've done the best you can is a reward in and of itself. But on the path to a fulfilled life, peaceful afterlife, what precept of singularity in your life do you find most challenging for you, and why? And I realize I may be like, hey, tell me all your dirty laundry with this question. It's not quite the direction I mean. We can be more philosophical. I don't need the details here.
Sure.
But I would love to understand, what precept do you find most challenging, and what are you dealing with more regularly than the others?
Great. So thank you for that. And again, I do mention at the outset of the book that these are lessons that I learned the hard way by breaking the precepts, being a repeat offender for the better part of 40 years before I got my act together very recently and said, hey, I think I discovered something. I'm onto something here. Okay. Is this anything? Actually, Jerry, I love Jerry Seinfeld. I mention the guy all the time. He put out a book called Is This Anything? And it's basically all his career, all the jokes he's ever used in his stand-up sets and everything that he does in Seinfeld. And it's called Is This Anything? Like, hey, am I onto something here? Is this anything? So I feel like this is my Is This Anything singularity, where I came up with some things that could be useful. So to answer your question, Topher, the two, and they're kind of twin, a lot of the precepts, right? They are all interconnected because they form a whole. But I would say it's 9 and 10, which is 9 is bloom where you're planted. And 10 is promotion must come from within before it manifests outwardly. I feel like I did horrible with both of those. Again, the better part of 40 years. And I'm 41, by the way. It's not like I have decades of experience of living successfully, so to speak. But I feel like, especially in my 30s, making that transition into being a married guy. I got married at 30. Our son came literally like 10 or 11 months after the wedding. I mean, it's like this, home ownership a few years after that. I felt like I kept looking for that solution outside of myself. And again, and this could even tie the third precept, all solutions come from within where you are now, right? There is a lot of unity in the precepts because I feel it is, and again, it's a singular lesson that has different facets to it. That's why it's singularity. It all comes back to the one same thing. But I felt like I kept looking for the solution elsewhere. I can make more money. I'm good at sales. I got to go into something that pays big commissions. Not appreciating the opportunities that I had at the time, not blooming where I was planted, always looking for that outside, the next big thing. And it created stirred up a lot of uncertainty in my life. And, now I'm married, so it's not just me, it's my wife and my son. And I think that I suffered the negative consequences of that unstable thinking much too long, which is now, okay, I graduated from the School of Hard Knocks, and now I have that authority to write a book. Hey, guys, if I had read Singularity in my 20s and actually digested and processed it, I could have saved myself a lot of heartache and probably be a lot further down into my career or, financially, or however you want to look at that, with the trappings of success in a worldly sense. So to answer honestly, I would say those are the ones, looking for external solutions, always thinking there's something better, grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. and it never is. And that's why you have to learn to, in my mind, to really bloom where you are planted with what you're doing, who you're with. That's a recurring theme of the book. Do what you can where you are with what you have. You don't have to keep searching for that thing that is just out of reach, right? That one thing, like the example in the book is Eve, right? I put that of Eve looking for that apple. She desired the apple because it was good for food and it was to be desired to make one wise. And I just think the fact that the Bible, the greatest book, hands down, ever written, right? It's actually, of course, an editorial project because it's not one author. It's something like 44 authors, 66 books, something like that. But the fact that the greatest publication ever devised by mankind, whether or not there's divine inspiration behind it, opens with the protagonist, it ends up being kind of a villain, reaching for that external solution to an entire internal need. I think there's a chord there that's struck inside me, and maybe there's other people that can resonate with that. So that's what I would say.
I like it. Yeah, it's I think, as I read the book, recognizing where am I sort of on the scale, because it's not hey, you're following this, or hey, you're not following this.
Right.
There's a scale here, and depending on which point in your life you are, you may be adhering to one precept far more than you are another. But as I read it, I sort of had that sense of internal reflection where it's like, okay, where do I fall on this one? How have I failed on this one recently? And I got to tell you, every single one of them I found something. So the fact that you narrowed it down to two, Luis, that's exciting to me. Good for you, man. I'm gonna get there, I think.
That's awesome, Toph. Thank you, and I appreciate the question. If you guys don't mind, I have a couple for you guys here. David. So first question, and you kind of already touched on it. If you want, you can answer briefly why you decided to produce Teddy Newman's Heaven, if you want to expand on that. And then I'll have a quick follow-up on Singularity once you answer that question.
Because it was or is a combination of fantasy and philosophy. I like to do stories that have a more pleasant themes to them. I understand that it can't be all pleasant, but things like apocalyptic, or that's not the right word, but doomsday books, right, and that sort of thing, they turn me off.
Sure.
And I am attracted to this type of material. So especially that it has some uplifting elements to it, chances to be creative with it, rather than just a destructive mentality, or the future is going to be bad.
Right.
Yeah, there's no options. It's just got to be bad. So that's what attracted me to it, and I think the part that was given as a teaser was when Teddy wakes up in heaven, and he's in this bed. He doesn't know how he got there. He looks outside a window, sees a beautiful scenery, realizes he's in a house, doesn't know what the house is. It's not familiar to him. But he hears a knock at the door, and he goes downstairs. That maybe is the most descriptive part of the book. And I purposely read that a little bit slower, because what's going to happen? What's next here? I'm in this strange place. I hear a knock at the door. I don't know who it is. And of course, the intro ends right there. but that's what, in a nutshell, like that's what attracted me to it, the wonder and mystery of the story, and the concept of what is heaven like, without coming up with a this way and no other way, which that would have turned me off.
Sure.
Heaven is only like this. No, I can't accept that.
Love it. Thank you for that. And again, you do a masterful job with the narration. I hear nothing but compliments and kudos. And I'm sure that it's led people to find your narration work with other authors, which again, I'm super happy for. Just you deserve much success because of the quality of your work and because of the person you are. So I do appreciate that, David.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. All right. So which precept in Singularity, and you can answer this one of either way, which most resonates with you, or might make an interesting conversation, which one, if any, do you disagree with and why?
That's a question for me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. The one that resonates with me the most is want nothing that you don't already have. And I don't look at that from a perspective of well, I have nothing to shoot for in life. It's, I have no desires, none, that could, make me want to be productive and that sort of thing. But I think it's more of a don't be obsessed with things you don't have. I heard this quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I can't remember it exactly. But if you take someone who is, always looking to amass and, looking to just own as much as possible, they're driven that way, versus someone who recognizes what they have, appreciates what they have, can appreciate nicer things, but is not obsessed with it. That person has something that the other person will never have. That's called enough. They have enough. That other person will never have enough. Talking about the one that has to have, once you've achieved this level, well, I want to achieve another, and I want to get, now one boat is not enough. I want another one. It goes on and on and on. They'll never have enough, and I never conceived of that as a thing, enough as a thing, and it just that's stuck with me when I saw that quote, and that's very much similar to the precept in Singularity. The one that the second one.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. And I don't know if you wanted to answer, and then I was gonna hop over to Topher with the similar questions, but is there one that you disagree with or had a hard time kind of digesting and why? I'm not saying that there is, but there may be. So again, this is an open forum for that.
Wait, question for me on that one?
No, it's for David. Sorry,
Oh,
I'm staying on
I'm
David,
sorry.
and then I'm gonna pivot to Topher.
I got a little lost in there.
Yeah.
There wasn't one that I disagreed with, really, that I thought, well, this doesn't fit, so I really can't say that there was one that stuck with me that way.
Awesome.
It all seemed to make sense.
Appreciate it. And again, to me, that's tremendous feedback coming from you. I do appreciate that. I'm going to pivot over to Mr. Reynoso. Topher, why did you decide to write the afterword for Teddy Newman, and what inspired it? I think your afterword stayed with me. David wrote something also for the audiobook version. I'm not sure if you've heard. Very interesting. But where did that come from? I could feel that there's a lot. I feel like there's a philosopher inside you, and I think there may be a book inside you that wants to come out. You need some prodding.
I appreciate that, but I don't know that to be true. Either of those things, but I do like to say that I fumble around in philosophy sometimes, and I feel like things that deal sort of in the metaphysical and the, this isn't your only life, this isn't, parallel universes, afterlife, those types of stories draw me in because I like to think about reality sort of being broken the way that we know it. And I think it's a good reminder of how small we are, that it's a great big universe out there and it all does not revolve around me is a very good reminder, something to have. And then at the same time, what I loved about Teddy Newman is that I am so unique and so important to God, to whatever it is that created you, that you believe in, that I can simultaneously be dust in the wind and yet the most sparkly, important piece of dust ever in existence. And that like those don't contrast, those actually go together really beautifully in our existence. And I thought Teddy Newman helped draw some of that, where it was like, hey man, it's not all about you. There's a lot more going on out there that you don't even know about, but Yeshua himself is going to show up and take care of you and be there for you because you're that important to him on a personal level. And so that type of connection of those two ideas was something that I thought was really nicely brought out in Teddy Newman. And so that sort of mentality made me feel like, man, I've got a lot to say, I think, on this subject specifically, because of what Teddy Newman and other readings and things like that have inspired. I feel like that notion has been developed a lot in my mind. And so I felt like, yeah, I got a few words that I think I can throw down for you on this. And it was a lot of fun trying to put kind of my brain to paper on some of that and realizing how incoherent some of it is, and then trying to make it coherent is like, man, I do respect the writer. They're doing this all day long. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was my honor to do that. And there were so many thoughts inspired that it actually, getting the thoughts out wasn't the hard part. It was getting them together in something coherent that was tougher. But I loved the opportunity. Thanks, Luis.
My pleasure. Absolutely. And then I have one last question for Topher, and then I'm going to kind of metaphorically pass the mic one more time to each of you to see if there's any other questions that you want to give to either one of us. Okay.
Okay.
And if not, that's okay. Totally up to you. So Topher, which precept in Singularity most resonates with you and why? And is there a precept you disagree with? If so, why?
So I'll start with the one that I struggle with. I'll say, I'm not going to fully say disagree because I think there are things in it that I appreciate. But number 5, everything that happens is okay. What does not happen was not necessary, is like so hard to swallow. Right? Like how could everything be okay? Like there's a lot of messed up stuff going on out there.
Right.
And so that one always, and I mean, this is a struggle that's been happening in philosophy since I think people were thinking, where it's like, how could evil exist simultaneously with God's existence? And this question comes up a lot, and it even gets talked about in Singularity quite a bit. But the thing I think personally that I struggle with in this one is there's a phrase that kind of drives me nuts that a lot of people say. They'll say, don't worry about the things you can't control. And I'm like, dude, those are the only things I worry about. Like if it's in my control, I
Yeah.
can figure it out. Like, so are you saying don't worry about anything ever? Because I don't get that. And so that one I say is a struggle for me because all these things happening around me in the world, it's hard to just be like, that's okay. And I understand like what the precept means behind it and the like almost leaning in and coming out of think peace, I think is a really good like transition to 5.
Right.
But it's still really tough to swallow that precept as like, no, everything's okay. Yeah, but I just got robbed. Like I just got mugged. What are you talking about? This is okay.
It's okay, Topher. It didn't happen to me.
In a nutshell.
That's why everything's okay, because it didn't happen to me.
So the person
I mean,
that it didn't happen
that's cynical, of course, but just, it's good somewhere.
It's good
5 o'clock
somewhere.
somewhere. Okay, guys.
Somebody's not dealing with this.
Yeah. If I could respond briefly to that,
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate it, and I thank you for pointing that out. I do not expect singularity to be embraced with open arms by everybody. If you agree with it 100%, you might not understand it. It's a joke I like to say. So no, I think that, yeah, there's definitely some things that are actually, it's funny because I shared the audiobook with another colleague of mine, and he gave me back his notes. And it was funny because it was a chapter by chapter, like, number 1, I liked it. Number 2, this is BS. Number 3, this is all right. Number 4, all right, yeah. Number 5, no way. Number 6, it was like that. It was his feedback. And he hasn't left a formal review, but this is what he put to me in a private message. And I said, you know, I mean, it's philosophical, it's somewhat deep.
Yeah.
And the truth is that, you know, if you're not going to say something unique, why write it at all? If I was going to write your typical Western, hey, you're the master of your universe. If you don't like something, change it. This is actually written much more from a more of an Eastern philosophical point of view, much more passive sounds bad, but actually reference that in Singularity, how in the Western dominated culture that we all come from, passivity is bad, going with the flow is bad, acceptance is bad. We're taught to be game changers and disruptors and all this. But again, what I remind people is that this is for transcendental living, right? If you want to literally rise above and beyond how most people live. So that's why I said in the beginning chapter, while simple, it is not easy because most people are going to have mental blocks that keep them from accepting this. Now, I felt, to your point, Topher, I felt guilty, particularly writing chapters 4 and 5, right around there, around the, you know, second third of the book, because depending on how you read that, you can go, oh my gosh, this guy just doesn't care about anything. And there's a lot of terrible things going on.
Yeah,
in 2022 and before that, right? But my point is, hey, in Messiah Complex, right? Chapter 4, Think Peace. You are not going to save the world. Even the world saviors have not been able to completely save the world. They saved some of us emotionally. And again, that's in our own mind. So very valid point. It's not an easy thing, but I think the more you digest it, maybe this comes with age somewhat. You're like, you know what? It may not sound nice, but it's true. And the truth is that if you want to help change the world, you can contribute to it by having more internal peace. And this peace and this Zen-like presence that you carry with you throughout the day is going to infect people in a positive way. It's going to make your coworkers better, your customers, your wife, your children. And that is a subtle way to change the world, I think, is by exuding, hey, everything's not okay, and that's okay. Right? That's the main takeaway, my point.
I think that's a good perspective of it. It's like, it's not validation or like what happened is right in any way. It's you're gonna be okay. That like everything is going to be all right. We're going to get through this. And I think it's that sort of mentality after, especially that think piece, that helps you sort of enter the next level of transcendental, where it's like, okay, your thinking piece, now it's like, let's look around the world and everything that's happening to me and that I'm doing, and let's make sure that, you know, you're okay, that this isn't the end. You're gonna be okay. You're gonna move on. But yeah, that definitely was the one that I was like, I went back and read that one probably 2 or 3 times. It's like, I don't know, man.
Love it.
But the one that I really connected with the most was number 3. All solutions come from within where you are now. And so that one really resonates with me. You know, we've talked a lot about, you know, how material things, and you talk about this too, where you can have, you know, 0 in your bank account and still be a very wealthy person and be a very fulfilled individual. And it doesn't, like, there's no direct tie between those. But also, to contrast that, you don't have to be poor in order to be living transcendentally.
Sure.
And so it's like, for me, this all solutions come from within is, it doesn't matter what situation I'm in, I can find a solution that's going to make me happy, that's going to bring me to happiness, because it's coming from within me. It's me that I'm becoming happy with. And then wherever I take me, I can still be happy. And so that's the one that I liked the most, because it also resonates with some of the concepts that you were doing in Teddy Newman, where it's like, if you want to be happy in the afterlife, obviously being a good person is important. It helps sort of set the table for where you're going to be after this. But it has to come from internally to get you there. It's like, I could be born Christian, I could be born Jewish, I could be born, you know, in all these different ways. But if I don't find that solution, if it doesn't come from within me, like, I don't want to be, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called Mormons. And so for me, it's like, well, I could be Mormon just because my parents were Mormon, or I can actually stop, think, do the analysis, find something from within me that draws me to a particular religion or a way of thinking. And only then am I actually going to be able to work through to think peace, to everything is okay. Until you're good with yourself and find those solutions from within, you're not going to be able to move to those next steps. And that's a tough one to do, but it really resonated with me. It was like, yes, everybody needs to recognize your happiness isn't coming from Instagram. Your happiness isn't coming, you're not going to find that solution even in a book. You're going to find it from within.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it isn't the guy on the news. It isn't whoever you're following on Instagram or Facebook or whatever. You do have to ultimately distill it down and figure out what really resonates within you, rather than getting in one camp or the other. And that's something I wanted to ask you about, Luis. The very first precept, banish duality. You know, before I started doing this, I had a concept of what duality is, but not a name for it. A concept of singularity, what that is, but not a name for it. So duality, you know, correct me if I'm not presenting this right, but duality means you need to believe a certain way, and there is no gray area. And that's the duality thing. It's yes or no, black or white, up or down, etc. The singularity is, it takes that up and down, the black and white, and considers it as both halves of one thing. Is that pretty much
Yes.
singular?
In your own words, that's perfectly described. Sure.
So one of the questions I was going to pose to you was, given that there are some people in the world who, they have such polar beliefs, such as some people think the world is round, some people think it's flat. How do you draw singularity out of that? Or how can you apply singularity to something like that, where it's not both of them can be right?
Perfect.
Am I saying, or am I barking up the wrong tree with this?
No,
No.
I love the question. What I think I hear you saying, and you can correct me, is how do you sort of justify singularity when so much of the world operates with duality or believes, or is that what you're saying? Like, how do you make singularity work with what you see is not singularity? Or is it you're saying, how do you have singularity when other people don't?
It's how do you apply that concept? I want to get away from the idea of duality, in that you have to be in one camp or the other, one tribe or the other. Okay. There are still certain things I believe. I won't, it'll take some evidence to change them if they needed, if they in fact are wrong.
Mhm.
But such as the earth being flat or the earth being
Right.
round. Okay,
Okay.
so how can you take something like singularity and say, well, the earth is flat and it is round? No, I don't see how
Right.
that happens. But I'm not saying I'm not saying this to discount the concept of singularity. I'm saying is, how do you take something like that, a concept like singularity, and apply it to uh, something where there's that much of a dichotomy?
Right. So how do you, yeah, I understand what you're saying. The way I would answer that is that, yes, there is a black and there's a white, right? There are natural sort of divisions. There's some things that are right in our mind. There's some things that are wrong. So again, singularity seeks to recognize those opposites and again, tie them into a cohesive whole where, like I mentioned at the very opening of the book, there's day and there's sunlight and there's the moonlight, but the whole 24-hour period is one day, right? We could talk about opposite sides of the coin that form the single coin. So in order to live with singularity, I'm not saying you have to necessarily accept or even like the things that are opposite or that disagree with you. My main message behind singularity is that you can acknowledge there are things that do not agree with you, but there's no reason to impose that on others, right? The same token, other people can be okay with some things that they don't have to impose on you. Singularity isn't so much about being okay with everything. It's not an ultra progressive political stance where like everything in the world's fine and let's just accept everybody 100% for everything that they do, whether it's right or wrong. What singularity tries to do is make you recognize, if the best example I can give you is a fish that is born in the water doesn't know that it's in water. It has no idea. It thinks that the water is the only reality, right? So what singularity seeks to do is to try to somehow open the fish's eyes. Hey, you were born in water, you've been raised in water, you're surrounded by water, right? And that's neither right nor wrong, but just realize that this is your fishbowl. It's not necessarily somebody else's habitat or their fishbowl. I don't know if that answers the question or confuses it more, but the bottom line is, in writing a book is such a singularity when there is so much dichotomy and division, the way I would reconcile the message of the book is learn, I talk about a lot, especially in the beginning of the book, learn to recognize yourself and others, right? See the humanity that binds us together. Whether or not you agree with someone's political views, their sexual orientation, their habits, their whatever it is, their ideologies, their religion, learn to recognize that it's another person that was born into that, that was raised with that, that somehow for them it makes sense. You don't have to accept it and adopt it in your own life, but you can recognize them as being okay because they're in their element. So when you talk about, some people say the world is flat, other people say the world is round. The people that say the world is flat, don't argue with it. Just, okay, you believe the world is flat? You know what, you're entitled to that opinion, and I'm not going to try to counteract you, because the truth is, unless you've gone around the world with a tape measure, right, or a ball of string, and actually tied the knot after circumnavigating the world, the truth is we can't say for a fact. I mean, we can conjecture with lots of great evidence, but Singularity would respect the other opinion's autonomy enough to say, hey, listen, you're entitled to that opinion. I happen to believe different, but the fact that you think the world is flat is okay with me. It's not going to take any bread off my table that you think that way. So it's kind of live and let live, so to speak. And I say at the end of the book, hey guys, these are not, earth-shattering ideas that originate with me. Of course, there is a lot of scripture, particularly from King Solomon, who was considered one of the wisest men alive, even if it's just mythology. But I'm not saying, I'm in the same league with Solomon. What I'm trying to say is that, in my opinion, true philosophy has a similar ring and similar feel, because it is somewhat the message of truth. And it's hard to say that there's a truth, but I do believe, like you're saying, David, that there is truth. The fact that we may not know exactly what it is doesn't mean that there isn't a truth. And this reminds me of a conversation, actually, when I was 20 or something, very young. And it was about religion, and we're talking about Jesus. And this particular person said, hey, listen, I don't want you pushing your truth on me. And I said, no, I don't want to push my truth on you, but would you agree that whether or not I'm right, there is a truth, right, outside of our opinions? And that person said, yes, I believe that there's a truth outside our individual opinions of it. And I think it's kind of a cerebral message, but that's what I'm trying to capture in Singularity. And the world will give me the verdict probably long after I've been deceased, whether or not the message gets across, whether it was heard, but that's the heart with which the book was written. Mm-hmm. So thank you for the question, a very deep question. And I may only have, I've given you more to think about than answer, but I don't know. But,
What you featured in the book repeatedly was quotations from Solomon, which reference the concept of vanity, that it's all vanity. At one point, it seems like his quest for knowledge, if I'm not misunderstanding this, it seemed that his actual quest for knowledge was vanity. And there is, knowledge is good. The thirst for it as the be all end all, and once I have wisdom, knowledge, then that will be it. And it isn't. It's what you do with it. But I can see the distinction between, okay, you believe the earth is flat, I believe it's round. That difference in belief is vanity, because does it really matter what you think or I think?
Right.
It's the earth is round, or is it, or it isn't. And whatever we believe, the difference of that is that we have a difference is vanity. And yes, vanity leads to nowhere. It's just doesn't do you any good. So I like that you repeatedly put that in there. That don't overestimate what conditions are, what circumstances are, because, or what you know, or what you think you know, because when you get down to the end of it, it's humanity.
Perfect. Perfectly said.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the question. Topher, did you have a final question for myself or David or both? And I think with that, maybe we can start wrapping it up. I mean, I could talk to you guys till the cows come home.
Yeah, it's same here.
Yeah.
I mean, even just from that last combo, yeah, I was reminded of a ton of stuff. I could probably talk for another hour with you guys easily, but I'll try to stifle that for now. Put a pin in it. Maybe we come back to it another time.
We can have another discussion in a few months. That would be interesting, actually. Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I think what I would ask of you, Luis, is that, obviously writers draw a lot of inspiration from their own lives, and their own experiences inform, in many ways, what it is that they write. Now, sometimes a writer will actively try to go against their experience to try and portray something that they have not experienced or that they imagine. But just reading Teddy Newman, I drew some obvious parallels to some of what I know in your personal life. And so I'd love to hear, is there anything from the story of Teddy that you felt was sort of you longing to have that experience or that outcome? Because I can imagine you have a young boy, you have a wife. If you were in Teddy's shoes and suddenly you'd passed away, I can't imagine that you didn't think a little bit about how you fit into those shoes. And so I'm interested, was there anything in that inspiration that made you feel like, yeah, this is what I would like, this is how I would like to be, or this is what I'm aspiring to get to?
Thank you for the question, Topher. It's an excellent question. Yeah, I don't think, again, because you happen to know me on the personal side, you have some insight into that. I have no qualms about saying that, yeah, I modeled Teddy. I am Teddy Newman in a way. His kind of frustration initially, with the way his things were going for him, how, he had a son and a wife, and that happens to be exactly my family situation. I was 40 when Teddy Newman was published. I turned 40 the day Teddy Newman was published. I actually wrote it as 38 and 39-year-old, really, was when the bulk of the writing was about. And when I published it, my son was 9, right? In the book, not to give too much away, but basically Teddy Newman dies at 40. He has a 9-year-old son that he leaves behind. It's his only child. That's exactly my situation personally. I did write from the point of view of, I think there's something, and I talk about this in Singularity too, that it's wise to have an eye towards eternity and another foot grounded firmly on the soil beneath our feet here on earth. I don't know what it is that I do have, and maybe this is part of that, that inspiration that I have that helps me write, is that I do have an eye towards eternity, and I consider how ephemeral and fleeting life is. Like, in a word, I'm prepared to die tonight. I hope I don't. But I do not take any day for granted. I don't take a week for granted. I don't take for granted that I'm going to make it to 45. I'm 41 now. I hope I make it at least to 88. I don't know that I will. But I think the way my mind kind of works is I made peace with the fact that this is a fleeting life, that it's quick, that it goes by quicker than we think. So I kind of wrote Teddy Newman. For me, is very cathartic, because I think, hey, if I was ripped away from my family on the way to work, as it happens in the book, and I'm not giving much away, this all happens within the first few pages. You plan on reading it after seeing this. But I would love to wake up in this beautiful mansion, again, kind of choose your own adventure. I put you in the picture. Hey, you look out the window, there's a fruit grove and all this stuff. And then, there's a knock at the door. What do? I got to work for a living. Oh my God, should I stress out? all this stuff. And I would love to know that I'm going to be reunited with my family. I don't want to go into much detail again. I don't want to spoil it for someone that wants to check out the book. But I would love to, again, to know that they would be okay without me, right? Because I feel as provider, head of the family, yeah, sure, you worry, hey, would my family be okay? I mean, I know God's going to help them, but I would be out of the picture. So I think I did write as a way to kind of make peace with the fact that if something happened, it's almost like this. Hey, Luis died young. You know what? Don't worry about him. Read Teddy Newman. You'll know exactly what he's up to. I kind of, in the back of my mind, that's kind of the picture I had. If you guys ever hear about something happening to me and it's not in 40 or 50 years, if it's soon, God forbid, don't worry about me, because I'll be hanging out with John the Evangelist. I'll be, interviewing Mary Magdalene. I'll be off to the races. But I think it was funny because Erin Monique, right, your wife, Topher, and my sister read Teddy Newman, or I think she got through the audiobook actually. And what she told me is, she said, you know what, Luis, I really like the way that you wrote the women in the book, because I feel that I couldn't tell it was a man writing the women's characters in the book. It almost felt like it was a woman writing the women characters. Now, some guys may be macho and take offense at that. I took that as a huge compliment, because she said usually it's very tacky, the women's dialogue and their roles, and you can tell when a man is basically subjugating them and writing them kind of in a spoofy, cartoony way. I didn't get that feeling. To me, that was a compliment. And yeah, there's a lot of me in that, but I did also try to tap into that feminine aspect of divinity, which again is another major theme of the book. Also touched upon in Singularity on the 7th precept, and trust your life in the hands of divine guidance and provision, which is when I talk about the queen being on the seat of the throne. So that's what I would say on that. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, definitely take that as a compliment, Luis, from Aaron, because even recently, I don't want to take any shots at any particular authors, but we recently read a book where it was like, oh my gosh, every woman that this guy writes is like painfully annoying and like unintelligent and like has to be pandered to. It's just like, man, that is a projection of the author, not a projection of the women in his life. I guarantee it.
Yes. And by the way, all writing is a projection of the author. I'm sure you guys know that already in some respect.
It was just like, we got through about 100 pages. Like, I think we're done with this one. Which for me is, I grew up sort of, hey, I want to finish every book I start.
Sure.
Somewhere along the lines, I think in my late 20s, I was like, it occurred to me that I only have time in my life to read a set number of books.
Right.
And I was like, why am I going to waste time on something that I absolutely can't stand and that I don't feel like I'm drawing something from? So I threw that out long ago. So suffice it to say, we finished your book. We did not finish that author's book.
Thank you, Topher. Appreciate that. I don't know if you had another question for David or David had for Topher, and or not.
I think I've covered it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Topher, is there anything that you want to ask?
Like I said, I could keep going, but in respect of everyone's time, I will say we could end it, and then I could reach back out and pick your brains later. But if you have the time, I'll ask some questions.
Let's give it one final question. It could be for either one, and we'll cap it off there. Again, out of respect for the audience's time, like you mentioned.
Yeah, sounds good. So you actually brought up a point that I struggle with a lot on this one. And so it's not in any way a critique, but like your explanation of, hey, we don't know that it's round, unless you've walked the whole earth with a string and made sure that it's round, you don't know either. It had a very David Hume-esque sound to it, who Hume is like the great doubter of all things. And so it was just interesting because he comes at it from this perspective of I could drop a rock 100 times and it could fall to the earth every one of those 100 times. But on the 101st time, I really can't know that it's going to fall to the earth. Based on the evidence and the data that I have, I can say it's probably going to fall to the earth. But who knows? The world could be destroyed. All of a sudden, the sun explodes and everything's falling apart. Now, on that 101st drop, it doesn't fall. And so it's like his basic, like, you can't believe anything. Like, you may be plugged into that matrix machine right now, and none of this is real, right? It's that type of mentality where it's like, okay, you have to operate essentially what he's saying, or what my takeaway is that you have to constantly operate on faith. And even the scientists should be able to recognize you have to operate at some level on faith. That the structure, that the physics, that all of this that we know is actually going to continue functioning the way that we expect it to function.
Yeah, that's like if you get in a car and you drive down the street, you're expecting
Hope these brakes work.
Sorry?
I said, I hope these brakes still work.
Oh yeah, you're expecting the concept of friction to exist, so that you can apply the brakes, so that you can steer, so that you can even get out and walk. Yep. So you're saying I'll be fine. I'll just get out. I'll just go down the street and stop and turn left, and I'll wind up where I want to go. Yeah. Safely. Yeah. Okay. Yep. What if suddenly there's no more friction? You can't do that. So there is a level of faith involved here. It's sure. There has to be, even though it may not be admitted. It could be looked at such as, well, I'm doing this all based on facts. Okay, there's some level of fact in there, but you don't know moment to moment.
Yeah, and so I think my question comes along that line of, faith being the crux of our existence. Everything we do, get up in the morning, go to work, you're acting on some amount of faith in all of this. Mm-hmm. And faith is a struggle throughout, everyone's life. I'm sure we've all dealt with it in one way or another. But I'm thinking a little bit specifically about Teddy Newman and the characters in there and their faith before and then into the afterlife. And I'm curious about, it's almost like we feel validated, like we're expecting we get to the afterlife and turns out our faith was right. That if you want to put it in the terms of Christianity or anything like that, I was right, you were wrong, back to the duality type of thing where it's, Christianity or Judaism, it's Muslim or it's, Taoism, whatever it is. So
well, it's entirely possible that the afterlife, being that it's Teddy Newman's heaven or my heaven or whoever you want to pick, they're going to have a concept of it. Mm-hmm. That is going to be different. Mm-hmm. So, or at least that's what we're postulating here. Yeah, it's going to be different. Why can't it be with a different deity in their view?
And that's exactly where I'm leading to, David, in a very long-winded Topher sort of way. I apologize. What I'm getting to is when you wrote Teddy Newman and when you read it, David, did you walk away with the sense, or do you feel today still, that there's a possibility that this idea of deity is a construct that humans have put around some type of greater being? Can you imagine a possibility that Teddy Newman's heaven is actually Christian and that his neighbors is Muslim?
I can, yeah, I can imagine that. I can conceive it. There's it's possibility that our limited understanding of what God is could be a person, could be, as you pointed out, Luis, we conceive of him normally. I say him. We conceive of God normally as a male, but could be female, or could be neither. Could be just whatever it is that we just don't understand what it is. Could be whatever the universe is that is represents God. But we put we put them masculine, traditionally a masculine covering on it, and we look at it that way. And that's the way it's been looked at for years and years and years. So it's our way of understanding it. Well, maybe there's different ways, but I would assume that among us it seems to be Christianity, but there are other faiths. So
yeah, to bring it back to you, Luis, as well, David, I think you said that very succinctly, much more than I did, but to bring it back to you, Luis, as well, maybe to finish us off here, you had mentioned previously that, you had that friend you had a conversation with, and you were like, okay, but can we at least accept that there is a truth? And I think this is where this might actually challenge that a little bit of, is there actually a truth? Or could we conceive of a deity that helps us along without seeing a duality of truth being one thing or another?
Yeah. So I do understand the question, and I love it because it's a question and a statement. And David, I think we both noticed he's very good at capturing the essence and distilling what Topher and I take 6 years to say. So somehow he's like, he gets it like that. But yes,
I've been accused of the total opposite. Get to the point, Dave.
That's funny. Yeah, so I think I understand your question, Topher. And again, very deep question that could take us easily into another hour and a half of discussion. To wrap it up, could I have everything completely backwards in Teddy Newman? Absolutely, yes. Actually, Singularity, I think, tries to reconcile a little bit some of the dualism in Teddy. I do think it's more open-minded than a lot of, quote, maybe Christian literature. I do think it's more on the, on the rebellious side, depending on who you speak to, someone that's more orthodox in the tradition and in the faith. That said, I think Singularity seeks to atone for some of the sins of Teddy Newman in a way, and saying, hey, listen, by the way, Teddy Newman, beautiful tale, beautiful book. It's a myth and an allegory in a parable. Do with it what you will. I'm not proclaiming to, write it with religious authority or with spiritual authority of any kind. It's a myth and a fable. It's a mirror, like I had mentioned, that kind of helps. I did mention that even in Singularity, how every good book is a signpost that says you are here. I mean, because of the feedback you're getting from the reading, this is where you are on your journey. And I say in Singularity, by the way, my friends, we are all on that path from the minute we're born, and the doctor slaps our tush to make sure we got a healthy set of lungs, to the day a loved one closes our eyelids shut. This is all just a journey. And I also mentioned Singularity, there is no book that has the answer. I would say not even the Bible, and maybe to some people that's blasphemous, thing to say, but I have the humility to say, I don't think I have found the answer to life. I don't believe I have it. And by the way, there is no the answer, right? There are, because there's no the life, there are infinite lives for which infinite meanings must be furnished. And I think that is a direct quote from chapter 3, the third precept. So again, that ties back to humility. I think that the humble author, the humble philosopher, school teacher, tech guru, audio producer will say, listen, I don't know. And this is what makes life kind of fun and interesting. And the day I think that I do know, that's when that concrete dries and you stop growing, right? I think I heard, I'm not sure who said it, but they had said a very wise observation that everything that it grows is green and thereby flexible. You know, a tree's in trouble when it turns hard brown, stops growing, that's when it's inflexible and it can break. But as long as you are supple, green, just happy to be here on this ride that we're all sharing together. You can continue to learn and expand your mind. So I think that if I did pretend to be an authority or wrote with that kind of presumption, I think that that would make my books not as impactful as they can otherwise be. So I think that's something that I'm going to, you know, that I plan to stay with as long as I live. And if anything, I think the older I get, the more humble and the more like, oh, maybe I got this whole thing backwards. And Singularity was kind of my first attempt at saying, hey, listen, guys, yeah, I don't pretend to have the answer. By the way, no book has the answers. So good luck, you're on your own. And by the way, David, you did an awesome job reading that line. Topher, we got to get you the audiobook, buddy. So I know you have the print, but
oh no, I've got them at our house. Don't worry.
okay.
I listen to them with Mo sometimes because she she
Nice.
prefers the audio. I'm old school. I gotta have
I
it
like
in
the
my hands.
page. And the print,
But
yeah.
my wife is all about the audiobook, so I get to hear them when she's doing them. So I've heard David do the voices. That's why I was saying he's got that silky smooth voice.
Silky
No,
voice, yeah.
I know. Don't worry.
So guys, listen, with that, I want to thank you both so much from the bottom of my heart for taking this time on a Saturday out of your busy lives just to have this round table. And this really has been a fireside chat. And if you can just imagine a nice, you know, hearth going with really, you know, Lake Tahoe or something, you know, covered in snow, the mountains. That's kind of what I feel like the warmth of this conversation. I want to bless you both and thank you for, again, your time and your input. I don't know that we'll do this again. I would be curious to, maybe something that we could do, you know, down the line, just to, if we want to, we can discuss that offline. But thank you guys. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend. And hopefully this video will pique some interest in the writings and get people to check out these books. Obviously, I think there's one thing that we've shown is that they give you quite a bit to think about, if I may say so myself.
Thank you, Luis.
Yeah, thank you.
Great
Luis.
opportunity.
Great to meet you, David.
Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, my friends.